When I opened my bakery, my daughter called me the failure of the family. At church, my son-in-law said that I was dreaming too high, making horrible desserts. But when I got hired for the wedding of a billionaire and a sheikh fell in love with me. I am glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment from what city you are watching me. That way, I can see how far my story has reached. I was 66 years old when I decided it was finally time to do something for myself. After 4 decades of being a housewife, nursing my husband until his very last breath, 3 years ago, raising Rachel, and existing solely for the sake of others, I had finally scraped together the courage to open my own bakery. The idea was born during one of those long, breathless nights following Harold's funeral. I was standing in the kitchen, baking butter cookies, just like I had every Sunday since the day I got married, when the silence hit me. There was no one left to eat them. Rachel was busy living her own fast-paced life with Mark and the kids, and I was just lingering on the margins of everyone else's existence. But that night, a shift happened in the room. As I kneaded the butter and sugar together, my mind drifted back to my mother, to the way she taught me those very recipes when I was a little girl, and how her eyes would catch the light whenever someone praised her baking. I remembered Rachel's childhood birthdays, the pure glow on her face when she saw the chocolate cakes I had decorated with so much love. I thought about those family dinners, where Harold would always beg for a second slice of my lemon tart. I had something inside me. I had a gift that had been buried alive under years of domestic routine, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a flicker of hope. Using the savings Harold had left behind, I rented a tiny storefront right in the center of town. It was nothing glamorous, but it had these massive windows that swallowed the golden afternoon light and a commercial oven that made me feel like I could conquer the world, one pastry at a time. Those first few months were brutal. I dragged myself out of bed at 5 in the morning to bake the sweetbreads, the tarts, and the cakes that would eventually line the display cases. My hands, heavily lined with age, still remembered every single motion, every texture, the exact baking times. It felt as though a lifetime of cooking for my family had finally crystallized into a greater purpose. Rachel did not share my enthusiasm. From day one, she made sure I felt like I was making a catastrophic mistake. "Mom, at your age, you should be enjoying your retirement, not working yourself to the bone," she would tell me every time she visited. "Dad left you more than enough money to live comfortably. I just do not understand why you want to do this." Mark was infinitely worse. My son-in-law had this way of smiling that never quite reached his eyes, a specific cadence to his voice that could shrink you down to nothing without ever using an outright cruel word. He worked for a major corporate firm in town, and he made it a point to subtly remind me that he understood business and I did not. "Mother-in-law," he would say with that plastic grin. The bakery market is incredibly saturated. It requires a deep understanding of marketing, accounting, social media algorithms. It is highly complicated, but I kept pushing forward. Every morning when I fired up that oven and the heavy scent of fresh-baked bread flooded the room, I knew in my bones that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The Sunday that changed everything was one of those flawless spring mornings. The church hall was packed for the monthly community potluck, and I had brought a massive tray of my famous walnut chocolate brownies. I had stayed up late the night before, making absolutely certain that each square had the perfect texture, that razor-thin balance between sweet and bitter. I was arranging the brownies on the buffet table when I heard Rachel's voice right behind me. At first, my brain tricked me into thinking she was talking about someone else, because my mind simply refused to accept that my own daughter would say those words about me. It is just so embarrassing. Rachel was telling a circle of women we had known our entire lives. My mother has become the failure of the family. I froze the spatula, hovering lifelessly between the tray and the plate. The air completely lodged in my lungs. At 66, she suddenly decides she is a pastry chef. Rachel went on, completely oblivious to the fact that I was absorbing every single syllable. She is blowing through all the savings Dad left her on this ridiculous little bakery. She claims she is going to find herself. Give me a break. The women murmured something I could not quite make out, but I caught the heavy glances of pity they shot in my direction the second they realized I was standing right there. That was when Mark joined the circle, and his voice cut across the room like a switchblade. "Rachel is absolutely right," he said, projecting his voice just enough so that half the congregation could hear. "Poor Joanne is dreaming way too high. The cakes she makes are horrible, but nobody has the heart to tell her the truth. It is honestly sad watching people who just do not know when to throw in the towel." I felt the floorboards give way beneath my feet. The ambient chatter around me died out. Familiar faces turned in my direction, their expressions painted with a toxic blend of curiosity and pity that pierced straight through my soul. Rachel finally turned around and saw me standing there, the tray of brownies physically shaking in my grip. For a split second, a flash of pure panic crossed her eyes, but she instantly masked it with that familiar, suffocating look of superiority. "Mom," she said, using the tone you would reserve for a child caught eavesdropping on grown-ups. "I did not know you were standing there." I could not form a single word. Tears were burning like acid in the corners of my eyes, but I swore to myself I would not let them fall in front of that crowd. I refused to hand them that satisfaction. I set the tray down on the table with trembling hands and walked straight toward the exit. I could feel the weight of 100 eyes digging into my spine. I heard the frantic whispers, Rachel's hollow excuses, the nervous, jagged laughter of someone desperately trying to cut the tension. But beneath all that noise, I heard something else. Mrs. Carmichael, an 80-year-old woman who had always shown me nothing but kindness, leaned over to her daughter and whispered, "How incredibly cruel. Those brownies were absolutely delicious." That night, sitting alone in the dead quiet of my house, I found myself back in the kitchen where this whole journey began. Rachel and Mark's words bounced around my skull in an endless punishing loop. The failure of the family dreaming too high. Horrible cakes. Yet somewhere, deep down in the dark, a tiny piece of me flat out refused to surrender. Maybe it was the ghost of my mother, a woman who never got the chance to chase her own dreams. Maybe it was the lingering memory of Harold, who always swore I had a rare, undeniable gift for baking. Or maybe it was simply the fact that for the first time in my entire existence, I had built something that belonged entirely to me. The next morning, I dragged myself out of bed at 5 o'clock, just like always, fired up the oven, and got straight back to work. Because even if my own flesh and blood had no faith in me, I still believed in myself. And that stubborn, quiet belief would be the only thing holding me together through the brutal days looming on the horizon. The days following that public humiliation at the church were the most profoundly isolating days of my life. Every morning I woke up with the crushing weight of Rachel's words sitting squarely on my chest, but somehow my feet always found their way back to the bakery. It was strange, realizing how easily agony can share a room with sheer determination. As I rolled out the dough for the morning croissants, hot tears would streak down my face, entirely beyond my control. Yet my hands kept moving, as if they had a mind of their own. as if they understood a truth my broken heart had not yet grasped. The bakery remained a ghost town most of the time. A few people would wander in, buy a pastry out of sheer politeness, and hurry out the door. I could see it in their eyes, that sickening cocktail of pity and awkwardness people wear when they do not know what to say to a tragedy. One Thursday afternoon, while I was scrubbing the display cases for the 5th time, I spotted Rachel strolling down the opposite sidewalk with her book club friends. She stopped dead in her tracks, right across from my shop. And even though the thick glass blocked out her words, I knew exactly what she was saying by the way she aggressively gestured toward my window, and by the tight expressions on her friends' faces. One of them, Patricia Vance, a woman I had known since Rachel was in elementary school, locked eyes with me for a fraction of a second. For a moment, I thought she might cross the street, maybe come inside and buy a coffee. But she just offered a tight shake of her head and kept walking with the pack. That night, as I finally locked the heavy front door and walked toward my car, I heard footsteps creeping up behind me. It was Mark. "Mother-in-law," he called out, using that artificially soft tone he deployed whenever he wanted to sound deeply concerned. "We need to talk." I stopped walking, but I did not turn around. I simply did not have the emotional bandwidth for another fight. "Rachel is incredibly worried about you," he pressed on. "We have been talking to a few of our friends in town, and everyone is on the exact same page. This just is not working. Look around. You have no foot traffic. You are bleeding the money that Harold broke his back his entire life to save." His words felt like fine needles slipping under my skin. Mostly because he was right about the empty shop, and he was right about the dwindling bank account. But that stubborn fire in my gut still refused to die. "It is not your money," I managed to say, my back still facing him in the dark. "Of course it is not," he replied, and I could practically hear the plastic smile stretching across his face. "We just care about you. We care about your dignity. My dignity." As if he had not been the one to drag it through the mud in front of the entire congregation. "Rachel thinks it would be best if you put the lease up for sale right now, before the financial bleeding gets worse. We could even help you find something a bit more appropriate for someone your age. Maybe some bridge classes, or volunteering down at the nursing home." I finally turned around, and something dark in my expression made him take a physical step back. "My age," I echoed, letting the words drip slowly from my mouth. "And what exactly is wrong with my age, Mark?" "Nothing. Nothing at all," he scrambled to recover. "It is just, well, a person has to be realistic. Running a commercial kitchen is a young person's game. It is highly demanding work. Like the work I did for 40 straight years, managing a household, raising a child, and nursing a dying husband. That kind of demanding work." He actually lost his words for a second, but then he recovered that infuriating, condescending smirk. That was different. That was just natural. Natural. As if every single thing I had poured my blood and sweat into for decades required zero skill, zero strength, zero dedication. As if my entire existence had been nothing but blind instinct, completely devoid of merit. I did not give him another word. I just got into my car, turned the ignition, and drove away, leaving him standing alone on the pavement. But the poison had already seeped into the water supply. Over the next few weeks, I felt the subtle shifts. The way eyes would dart away when I walked down the grocery aisles. The way the buzzing gossip at the hair salon would instantly flatline the second I walked past the window. The way neighbors who usually stopped for a chat were suddenly in a terrible rush when they spotted me on the sidewalk. Rachel had been putting in the work. She was not running an open smear campaign, but she did not have to. A whispered concern here, a tragic sigh there, and before long, the whole town was convinced Joanne Gallagher was suffering from a tragic, late-stage, midlife crisis. And her poor family was just beside themselves with worry. My sales plummeted into the abyss. Some days, I did not sell a single solitary pastry. I would just sit behind the glass counter, watching the world spin by outside my window, wondering if Rachel had been right all along, wondering if I really was just a foolish old woman who did not know when the game was over. But then, a ghost of a chance walked through the door. It was a miserable, stormy Friday afternoon, rain coming down in absolute sheets, and I was just about to flip the sign to closed when an older woman burst through the door, soaking wet, and laughing out loud at her own terrible luck. "Good Lord, this storm caught me completely off guard," she gasped, shaking the heavy rain from her trench coat. "Do you mind if I just hide out in here for a minute until it lets up?" "Not at all," I told her, pulling out a chair. "Let me get you a hot cup of coffee and a dry towel." "A coffee sounds like heaven, thank you." As I worked the espresso machine, I noticed her studying my bakery with a sharp, genuine intensity. She had to be pushing 80, but her eyes held the bright, predatory curiosity of a hawk. "Do you bake all of these yourself?" she asked. "Yes, every single one." "Do you mind if I try one of those eclairs? They look absolutely lethal." I plated the eclair with meticulous care, fully bracing myself for the usual polite, tight-lipped smile, followed by a flimsy excuse to leave it half-eaten. Instead, I watched her eyes flutter shut as she took the first bite, letting the flavors hit her as if she were decoding a masterpiece. "This is exquisite," she murmured. "Where on earth did you learn to make pastry cream like this?" "My mother taught me when I was a little girl. She was the head cook for a very wealthy estate before she got married." "It shows. This carries the distinct signature of someone who truly understands the old secrets of classical baking." We ended up talking for nearly an hour as the rain beat against the glass. She told me her name was Eleanor Hughes, that she had owned and operated the Oak Room restaurant for 30 years before retiring, and that she knew absolute perfection the second it hit her palate. And do you know what she told me right before she walked out the door? "My granddaughter is getting married next month. It is a very intimate wedding, family only. But I need someone to handle the dessert service. Would you be interested?" I felt a sudden, violent kick in my chest. "Are you serious?" "Deadly serious," she replied, a wicked little smile playing on her lips. "But you would have to pull out all the stops. My granddaughter is notoriously difficult to please when it comes to sweets. What is her weakness? Chocolate. Anything and everything chocolate." That night, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I fell asleep with a real smile anchored to my face. By dawn, I was already in the kitchen tearing through different chocolate recipes, fusing the ancient techniques my mother had drilled into me with the modern twists I had quietly perfected over the decades. But my sudden spark of life did not fly under the radar. Rachel pushed through the bakery doors on Monday morning, wearing a look I knew all too well. She had caught a scent. Mom. Patricia called me. She said she saw some unusual activity in here over the weekend. What exactly is going on? "I picked up a catering order," I said, keeping my voice painfully casual as I piped frosting onto a row of cupcakes. "An order. What kind of order?" "A small wedding, nothing crazy." I watched her eyes narrow into dangerous little slits. "Whose wedding?" I did not want to hand her the matches, but I knew my daughter. If I did not feed her the truth, she would dig it up somewhere else. "Eleanor Hughes. Her granddaughter is tying the knot." Eleanor Hughes, the woman who used to run the Oak Room. I just nodded, refusing to break eye contact with my frosting bag. Rachel went dead silent, And that icy quiet terrified me far more than if she had started screaming.
How fascinating,
She finally whispered. Eleanor has incredibly deep ties in this town. It would be a catastrophic shame if something were to go wrong. The threat was hanging right there in the open air, but I forced myself to walk right past it. I had real work to do, and for the first time in months, I had a real point to prove. I had no idea that Rachel was already mapping out a plan to ensure my tiny flicker of hope morphed into another spectacular public execution. And I had no idea that this one little catering gig, which seemed so small and contained, was about to blow my entire reality wide open. The date of Eleanor's granddaughter's wedding was closing in, and I had poured every ounce of my soul into constructing something otherworldly. For 7 straight days, I played mad scientist with chocolate. Belgian chocolate mousse layered with fresh, sharp raspberries. A dark chocolate tart cut with rich dulce de leche. And finally, my absolute magnum opus, a towering 3-tier cake built from layers of midnight chocolate sponge, Madagascar vanilla-infused white chocolate buttercream, and a mirror glaze ganache so flawless it reflected the room like a still black lake. Every millimeter was flawless. I had been burning the midnight oil until 2 in the morning for 3 days straight, completely ignoring the sharp ache radiating up my spine and the gritty exhaustion in my eyes. This cake was not just a job anymore. It was my manifesto. It was my proof of life. Tuesday morning, right as I was placing the final spun sugar details onto the top tier, the shop phone rang. Sweet Sunrise Bakery. Good morning, a crisp, highly professional female voice echoed through the receiver. This is Caroline Mercer with Elite Events. Am I speaking with the owner? This is Joanne Gallagher. Perfect, Mrs. Gallagher. Your work comes highly recommended. I am managing an event this weekend, something quite intimate, about 50 guests. The client is notoriously demanding, and I need someone who can execute high-end, flawless pastry work. What is your availability looking like? My pulse skyrocketed. Another gig. And this one sounded like major leagues. What kind of desserts are we talking about? A curated variety. Petit fours, individual tartlets, maybe something bright and fruit-forward. Budget is absolutely not an issue, but the execution must be flawless. Can we meet this afternoon to iron out the logistics? We locked in a meeting for that very afternoon. When I hung up the phone, I just stood there, the room spinning slightly with pure adrenaline. 2 catering gigs in a single week. Maybe the tides were actually turning. Caroline Mercer walked through my door at the exact agreed-upon minute. She was a strikingly sharp woman in her early 40s, wrapped in a tailored power suit and carrying a sleek tablet. She carried that quiet, terrifying confidence of a woman who commands high-stakes rooms for a living. Mrs. Gallagher, she greeted me, her smile warm but calculating. It is a genuine pleasure. I walked her through my portfolio, showing her the high-resolution photos of the wedding cake I was currently finishing for Eleanor. I watched the professional mask slip for just a second as her eyes lit up, biting into my lavender macarons and my lemon tartlets. This is exactly the caliber I have been hunting for, she said, her fingers flying across her tablet screen. My client is going to be absolutely thrilled. We spent the next hour deep in the weeds of menu design, plating aesthetics, and cold logistics. The event was dropping this Saturday afternoon at a private sprawling estate just outside city limits. Caroline needed a flawless rotation of 15 different desserts, all individual portions, plated with surgical precision. The compensation will be $3,000, she stated flatly. Half wired up front today, The remaining balance cleared on the day of the event. $3,000. That was more cash than this shop had seen in the last 2 months combined. I fought like hell to keep my face neutral, but I know the sheer relief was radiating off my skin. That works perfectly for me, I managed to say. We have a deal. The second Caroline drove away, I dialed Eleanor to share the massive win. Oh, that is absolutely brilliant, Joanne. She cheered through the phone. I knew you had lightning in a bottle. Quality people always recognize quality work. I stayed in the kitchen deep into the night, mapping out every microscopic detail of Caroline's menu. A surge of raw, crackling energy was rushing through my veins, a feeling I had not tasted in decades. For the first time since that crushing Sunday at the church, I felt like my feet were planted on solid ground. But on Wednesday morning, my fragile little glass house shattered. Rachel kicked the bakery door open like a SWAT team, her face flushed with absolute rage, her phone gripped like a weapon in her hand. "What in God's name is going on in here?" she screamed, skipping the greeting entirely. "Good morning, Rachel. What exactly are you talking about? About this?" She shoved the glowing screen into my face. It was Caroline Mercer's Facebook page, showcasing a gorgeous stylized photo of my tartlets, with the caption, "Just secured the absolute perfect boutique bakery for our most exclusive upcoming events." "I really do not see the problem here," I said, completely lost in her fury. "The problem, Mom, is that you are making a complete laughingstock out of this family. Patricia called me at dawn to tell me she saw some corporate woman walking out of here yesterday. And now you are plastering yourself all over social media, acting like you are some kind of Michelin star chef. I am not plastering anything anywhere. She took that photo and posted it on her own accord. Do you not realize how utterly pathetic this looks?" Rachel was pacing the floorboards like a trapped predator, a 66-year-old widow playing pretend businesswoman. "People are laughing at you, Mom. And because of you, they are laughing at us." Her words still had teeth, but this time I refused to let them bite down to the bone. I had actual, tangible work to execute, real paying clients who were blown away by my craft. "If people want to laugh, let them laugh," I said coldly, turning my back to her to prep my workstations. "I have a business to run. A business." She let out a dry, venomous laugh. "Mom, this is not a business. This is a delusion. And when the whole house of cards collapses, guess who gets stuck sweeping you off the floor?" I gave her silence. I had finally learned that feeding Rachel's fire only burned down the house. She stormed out a few minutes later, but not before I caught her making a hushed, frantic phone call from the driver's seat of her car, her eyes locked on me through the storefront window. Thursday afternoon, while I was carefully constructing Eleanor's cake, the shop phone rang. The voice on the other end turned my blood to ice. "Sweet Sunrise Bakery?" "Yes, this is Joanne." "Joanne, this is Caroline Mercer. I am incredibly sorry to call you at the 11th hour like this, but we have hit a massive roadblock regarding Saturday's event." My stomach dropped straight into the floorboards. What kind of roadblock? I have been fielding phone calls all morning. Certain individuals have brought some deeply concerning allegations to my attention regarding your operation. They are claiming you have zero high-volume event experience, that your product quality is wildly inconsistent, and that there are severe hygiene protocol issues. "Who exactly is feeding you this?" I demanded, though the ugly truth was already sitting heavy in my chest. "I cannot disclose my sources, but these are highly prominent voices in the community. One of them actually claims to be your immediate family." "Rachel, of course." "Caroline, those people have never tasted my professional catering. They have never stepped foot behind my counters. You were standing right here. You ate my food." I know, and that is exactly why this is tearing me apart. Your samples were world class, but I absolutely cannot gamble my firm's reputation on a rumor. This client is dangerously important. Please, I begged, and I hated the raw desperation bleeding through my voice. Just give me one shot to prove these people are lying through their teeth. A heavy, suffocating silence stretched across the line. You know what? She finally exhaled. Let's do this. I want you to prep a complete flight of the exact menu you planned for Saturday. Bring it directly to my corporate office tomorrow morning. If it is as bulletproof as I remember, we move forward. But if I spot a single flaw, one tiny reason to hesitate, I pull the plug. Done, I fired back instantly. After the line clicked dead, I stood frozen in the quiet shop for a long time, a dangerous cocktail of blinding rage and cold-blooded determination rushing through my system. Rachel had actively tried to slit my throat, but Caroline was leaving the door cracked open just enough for me to kick it down. That night, I worked with a manic, relentless focus I had never tapped into before. I engineered flawless test batches of all 15 desserts: lavender macarons, vanilla bean eclairs, fruit tartlets with silk-smooth pastry cream, hand-painted petit fours, artisanal dark chocolate truffles. Every single millimeter of sugar had to be an act of war. I was not just fighting for a paycheck anymore. I was fighting for my right to exist as a living, breathing human being, not just the pathetic punchline Rachel wanted me to be. By 3 a.m, the dust settled. I had a box packed with the most staggering, beautiful pastries I had ever created in my life. They were so hauntingly perfect, it almost felt like a crime that someone was going to eat them. Friday morning, I armored up in my best clothes, secured the pastry box in the passenger seat like it was a live explosive, and drove to Caroline's corporate headquarters with my heart hammering so violently against my ribs, I thought it might crack them. I had zero clue that this desperate little taste test was about to rip the fabric of my reality wide open. And I had no idea that Rachel, in her vicious crusade to bury me, had just handed me the exact key I needed to unlock my empire. The Elite Events headquarters was planted dead center in the financial district, inside a towering glass monolith that immediately made me feel small as I parked my beat-up Honda out front. I carried my pastry box like a sacred relic, walking with agonizing care so I would not shift a single flake of gold leaf. Caroline intercepted me and led me into a sleek, intimidating boardroom, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. The mahogany table was already dressed with bone china and heavy silver flatware, looking less like a tasting and more like a Michelin-starred execution. Mrs. Gallagher? She greeted me, her tone clipped. I highly appreciate you pivoting like this. As I unboxed my arsenal and began plating the desserts, I realized Caroline was not flying solo. Another woman was sitting in the shadows of the room. Younger, maybe early 30s, tracking my every move with a legal pad. This is Amanda, my senior partner, Caroline explained. I assume you do not mind her sitting in. Not at all, I lied smoothly, though I felt like a microbe under a microscope. The tasting kicked off in dead, chilling silence. Both women dissected each dessert with surgical precision, taking microscopic bites and scribbling furious notes. I stood at attention, hands clasped tight, desperately trying to decode the micro-expressions on their faces. After what felt like 3 lifetimes, Caroline slowly lowered her silver fork and locked eyes with me. Mrs. Gallagher, I need to ask you a very direct question, and I need you to give me the absolute, unfiltered truth. My stomach tied itself into a knot. Of course. Have you ever anchored large-scale, high-capacity events? Massive weddings, corporate galas, that tier of production? No, I confessed, keeping my chin up. The vast majority of my experience has been private family functions, small circle events, gigs like Eleanor's. They traded a heavy, encrypted look. And your training. Did you attend a recognized culinary institute? No. I absorbed everything from my mother, and I spent the last 40 years relentlessly experimenting, studying, and failing until I got it right. Another loaded look passed between them. I could feel the contract slipping right through my fingers. I see, Caroline said, writing something down. One final question. If this Saturday goes flawlessly, would you be open to scaling up, taking on massive contracts that require you to manage a brigade of staff and heavy production loads? Absolutely, I fired back without missing a beat. I am ready to scale. I am ready to learn whatever it takes to win. Caroline slowly leaned back in her leather chair, and for the first time since I walked in, a genuine, dangerous smile broke across her face. Mrs. Gallagher, I do not know who the hell fed me that poison about your bakery, but they were dead wrong. These desserts are not just good, they are competing with the elite pastry houses in New York. My knees nearly buckled with the adrenaline crash. The Saturday event is 100% locked in, she continued, but there is a massive piece of the puzzle we have not told you yet. Amanda flipped her legal pad over. Saturday is not exactly what we pitched to you, she said, initially. Caroline took over. It is a stress test. A stress test. We represent a terrifyingly high net worth client who is throwing a golden anniversary gala next month. It is going to be the absolute apex of the social season. 500 VIPs. Heavy political hitters. A-list names. The client strictly mandated that we break a local vendor for the dessert service. Someone who brings world-class art, but can also survive the crushing pressure of a 500-plate drop. My heart kicked into such a violent rhythm, I thought I might actually pass out. We have been quietly vetting kitchens for weeks. Amanda leaned in. Saturday is the final gauntlet. It is a small head count, 50 people. But those 50 people happen to be the client's absolute inner circle. If you blow their minds this weekend, the golden anniversary contract is exclusively yours. What exactly are we talking about here? I asked, the words barely making it past my teeth. Base rate for the pastry program, plus performance bonuses if execution is flawless. $50,000. It was more money than I had ever seen stacked in one place in my entire life. Who is the client? I finally choked out. Caroline and Amanda traded one last look, both grinning like wolves. Edward Sterling, Caroline said smoothly. Have you heard the name? Of course I knew Edward Sterling. Everyone in the tri-state area knew Edward Sterling. The man was a titan, sitting on a real estate and casino empire that practically printed money. His name was a permanent fixture in the glossy society pages, and rumor had it his Rolodex included senators, movie stars, and European royalty. His wife, Margaret, is celebrating their 50th anniversary next month, Amanda explained. They are pulling zero punches. The gala is at their private compound. Full symphony orchestra, private fireworks over the lake, the whole 9 yards. And if you survive the Saturday, Caroline added, you walk in as the exclusive pastry chef for the most untouchable event of the decade. I floated out of that high-rise on pure adrenaline. The entire drive home, my brain was just flashing those numbers like a neon sign. $50,000. It was a golden ticket, but the second my key turned the lock on the bakery door, gravity pulled me violently back to earth. I had exactly 48 hours to execute a 50-plate flawless service, and I was entirely alone. I had no brigade, no sous chefs, barely enough counter space. But I had the only weapon that actually mattered. a loaded gun aimed right at Rachel's narrative. That night, buried under prep lists and yield calculations, my phone buzzed. It was Eleanor. "Joanne, my dear, how are we holding up?" I fed her the details about the Saturday gauntlet, desperately trying to keep the panic out of my voice, but the sheer terror was definitely bleeding through. "Oh, this is magnificent," she roared. "Do you need a cavalry? I have a few girls who know how to survive a commercial kitchen." "I cannot ask you to do that, Eleanor." "Nonsense. We are going to war. I will be there at dawn with backup." Friday morning, Eleanor kicked the door open, flanked by 3 women, Dorothy, Clara, and Lucille. They were all older women, hardened veterans of feeding massive families for decades, moving with that lethal, quiet efficiency you only get from surviving 1,000 Thanksgiving dinners. "Hand me an apron," Dorothy barked, rolling up her sleeves. It has been a minute since I piped in Eclair. We locked in like a Swiss watch. Eleanor anchored the doughs. Clara hijacked the creams and fillings. Lucille executed the detail plating with a terrifying artistic precision. And Dorothy proved her muscle memory for choux pastry was completely intact. Right in the middle of the chaos, Rachel pushed through the door, freezing dead in her tracks as she watched 4 older women operating a commercial kitchen like a military strike team. "What exactly is going on in here?" she demanded, using that sharp, authoritative tone she deployed whenever reality did not bend to her will. "We are working," I said, my eyes completely locked on the ganache I was tempering. "Working on what, Mom? It is 10 in the morning, and this place looks like a sweatshop." Eleanor slowly straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron. There was a sudden, chilling weight to her posture. "Rachel, is it?" she asked, flashing a smile made of pure ice. "I have heard quite a bit about you, Rachel." Rachel blinked, visibly rattled by Eleanor's sheer authority. "Your mother is anchoring a highly sensitive VIP event tomorrow." Eleanor continued, her voice dangerously smooth. 50 ultra-exclusive guests. It is the kind of contract that rewrites a person's entire life. 50 guests? Rachel snapped her head toward me, genuine panic bleeding into her eyes. "Mom, what is she talking about? I gave her nothing." I just kept folding my ganache, realizing with a cold rush of euphoria that for the first time in months, I was the one holding the gun. "It seems you have absolutely no concept of the gold mine standing in your own family," Clara chimed in from the prep station, not even bothering to look up from the tartlets she was assembling. "Your mother is a force of nature." Rachel stood there for a few more agonizing minutes, entirely outmatched and deeply uncomfortable with the power dynamic in the room. Finally, she muttered some weak excuse about calling me later and bolted. The 4 women traded a deeply satisfying look. "That girl of yours has some serious blind spots," Lucille noted dryly. "Children usually need a brutal wake-up call to finally see their parents as human beings," Eleanor added, playing the diplomat. We pushed relentlessly until 11 o'clock Friday night. When the dust finally settled, we stared down a massive hall that would have made a French master weep. 15 distinct flavor profiles executed with terrifying perfection. Hundreds of miniature edible sculptures. Tomorrow is going to change everything. Joanne Eleanor told me as she pulled her coat on. I can feel it in the air. That night, I closed my eyes and felt something alien settling in my chest. Absolute, unshakable armor. I had no idea that tomorrow, I was not just going to drop the jaws of 50 billionaires. I was going to collide with a man who would alter the trajectory of my entire universe. And I had no idea that Rachel, blinded by her desperate need to watch me fail, was about to step right off a cliff. The Sterling compound was more staggering than anything I could have hallucinated. Massive, wrought iron gates groaned open to let my heavily loaded station wagon crawl up a winding, manicured driveway toward a colonial mansion that looked like it belonged in a cinema masterpiece. Caroline met me at the service entrance, practically vibrating with nervous energy. "Mrs. Gallagher, right on the dot. The heavy hitters are landing in 2 hours." She rushed me through a maze of marble hallways into a commercial-grade catering kitchen that swallowed my entire bakery whole. Acres of stainless steel industrial ranges and enough square footage to house a small army. "This is your command center." Caroline pointed to a massive prep island overlooking the gardens. "All your requested hardware is zeroed in. Platters, serviceware, stands. Are we missing anything?" As I began unboxing the fragile pastries and anchoring them to the silver platters, I could feel the mansion humming with that high-voltage pre-gala electricity. Florists screaming over centerpieces, waiters aggressively polishing crystal strings, tuning up in the ballroom. I went completely dead-eyed, locking into a state of absolute flow, making sure every single micro-detail was lethal. The lavender macaroons were stacked in flawless geometric towers on crystal pedestals. The fruit tartlets caught the halogen lights like spilled jewels. The eclairs were lined up with terrifying military precision. At exactly 6 o'clock, Caroline burst back through the double doors, flanked by a distinguished older man in a bespoke tuxedo who carried that quiet, lethal gravity that only comes from deep, old money. "Mrs. Gallagher," Caroline said, breathless, "allow me to introduce Mr. Edward Sterling." Edward Sterling was taller than I had pictured, with swept-back silver hair and pale blue eyes that looked like they were constantly calculating the room's net worth. But the moment those eyes landed on me, a disarming warmth broke through the ice. "Mrs. Gallagher," he said, offering a heavy, warm handshake, "I have been hearing some very dangerous rumors about your skill level." "It is an absolute privilege, Mr. Sterling. May I?" he asked, gesturing to the loaded prep tables. I handed him a lemon meringue tartlet. I watched him take a highly analytical bite, and a second later, his eyes snapped wide open with pure shock. "This is staggering," he whispered. "Where did you train?" "In my mother's kitchen, Mr. Sterling." Followed by 40 years of brutal trial and error, he let out a rich, booming laugh. "The finest culinary institute on earth." He systematically tasted 3 more pieces, and with every bite, the disbelief on his face deepened. "Caroline wasn't exaggerating," he finally conceded. "You are the exact weapon we need for Margaret's anniversary." My knees practically gave out from the sheer relief. "The black cars are pulling up as we speak," he noted. "Are we locked and loaded?" "Locked and loaded, Mr. Sterling." For the next hour, I hid in the shadows of the kitchen, watching through the service doors as the compound flooded with the elite. It was an ocean of sharp tuxedos and ruthless designer gowns drifting through the manicured gardens. It was a universe I had absolutely no business being inside. Yet, for the first time in my life, I felt zero intimidation. I was holding a royal flush. The moment of impact finally hit when Caroline rang the bell for the dessert service. The crowd drifted toward the massive buffet stations, and I watched from the crack in the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The detonation was instant. Faces lit up in pure, unadulterated shock. I heard sharp gasps of appreciation. I watched billionaires aggressively circling back for seconds and thirds. "Who is the mastermind behind this?" I heard an incredibly elegant woman demand. "A local boutique bakery," someone replied. "Joanne Gallagher." Gallagher? I don't recognize that name from the prominent families. "She is not from a prominent family." A voice sliced through the crowd, a voice I would recognize in my sleep. She is just an older woman playing pretend businesswoman. It was Rachel. Somehow, she had managed to infiltrate the party. The blood in my veins turned to liquid nitrogen. What in God's name was she doing here? I pressed my ear closer to the wood. Really? The elegant woman pushed back. Because these eclairs are outperforming anything I have eaten in my life. She is my mother-in-law, a male voice chimed in. Mark. Of course, they crashed it together. She has been causing a massive headache for the family lately. Hit 66 and suddenly decides she is a master chef. It is honestly a tragedy to watch. But if the product is this spectacular, another guest argued. Oh, I guarantee you she outsourced the heavy lifting. Mark laughed, deploying that sickening, condescending chuckle I hated so deeply. She probably paid some ghost kitchen to do the actual baking. I felt sick. Even here at the absolute peak of my victory, Rachel and Mark were actively trying to burn me at the stake. But then, a new voice cut through the noise. A deep, resonant voice, with a slight cultured accent I couldn't place. Forgive the interruption, said the man, and the sheer gravity in his tone made the entire circle freeze. Are we discussing the architect of tonight's pastry program? We are, Rachel answered foolishly, assuming she had just recruited another ally. She is my mother. She is currently spiraling through a very public midlife crisis. How utterly fascinating, the man replied smoothly, and something sharp in his delivery made Rachel snap her mouth shut. Because I have spent the last hour cross-examining half the guests in this room about these staggering desserts. The overwhelming consensus is that nobody has tasted execution like this since their last flight to Paris. A brutal, suffocating silence dropped over the group. Furthermore, the voice pressed on, driving the knife deeper. I just finished a private conversation with Edward Sterling himself. He informed me that this woman, who you just diagnosed as spiraling, literally just secured the most lucrative, highly contested catering contract of the entire fiscal year. $50,000 for a single evening. Rachel made a sound like she was choking on glass. Precisely. And according to Edward, this is merely the ground floor. It appears your mother is on the verge of becoming the most lethal, highly demanded pastry chef in the state. The dead silence that followed was so thick, you could have shattered it with a hammer. Now the man continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. One has to wonder why a family would choose to be publicly mortified by a woman of such terrifying genius, rather than falling to their knees in pride. I couldn't see Rachel's face, but I could vividly imagine the absolute soul-crushing humiliation melting her skin. If you will excuse me, the man finished cleanly. I am going to track down this Mrs. Gallagher. I intend to pay my respects to the master directly. I scrambled back to my prep station, aggressively rearranging empty silver trays to look busy. Seconds later, Caroline pushed through the swing doors, escorting the most devastatingly distinguished man I had ever laid eyes on. He was tall, mid-50s, with dark hair dusted in silver, and the most piercing, intelligent brown eyes I had ever seen. He was armored in a bespoke suit that screamed Savile Row, and a subtle gold crest pinned to his lapel hinted at serious old-world royalty. Mrs. Gallagher, Caroline said, her voice dripping with reverence. Please allow me to introduce Sheikh Khalil Al-Manzouri. He specifically requested an audience with you. The sheikh closed the distance and took my hand in both of his, a gesture that was simultaneously deeply respectful and shockingly warm. Mrs. Gallagher, he said, unleashing that dark, velvet voice that had just publicly executed my daughter. Meeting you is an absolute privilege. Your architecture tonight was nothing short of a revelation. Thank you. You are entirely too kind, I stammered, feeling the heat rush to my cheeks like a teenager. It is not kindness. It is an objective fact. I have not tasted a choux pastry that flawless in 20 years. It dragged me straight back to the hidden patisseries of my youth in Paris. We stood in that chaotic kitchen for 10 minutes, diving deep into the weeds of classical technique, raw ingredient sourcing, and the brutal necessity of preserving culinary heritage. He was sharp, wildly cultured, and fiercely interested in my brain. But more than that, he looked at me with a level of raw, unfiltered respect I hadn't felt in decades. I find myself wondering, he finally ventured his eyes locking onto mine, if you would do me the profound honor of joining me for lunch next week. I need to understand the history behind this level of genius. My pulse was redlining. A sheikh, a man who clearly breathed the rarest air on the planet, was asking me out? The honor would be entirely mine, I replied. As he was sliding a heavy gold-embossed card into my hand, I heard a sharp gasp behind me. It was Rachel. She was hovering in the doorway, her face pale as a ghost, looking like she had just watched a car crash. "Mom," she croaked, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." The sheikh slowly pivoted toward her, his smile polite but absolutely freezing. "Ah, you must be the daughter," he noted. "Your name has been floating around quite a bit tonight." Rachel physically recoiled, clearly remembering the massacre he had just orchestrated out in the garden. "You must be bursting with pride," he continued mercilessly. "Your mother is a titan." Rachel opened her mouth, but her brain short-circuited. Not a single sound came out. "If you will excuse me," the sheikh murmured, pressing a brief, breathtakingly respectful kiss to the back of my hand. "I will call you tomorrow to lock in our lunch." After the doors swung shut behind him, Rachel and I were left standing alone in the sterile glow of the kitchen. For the first time in her entire life, she was completely out of ammunition. "Mom," she finally choked out, "I had no idea." "No," I cut her off, my voice calm, cold, and final. "You had no idea, but you do now." That night, driving my beat-up Honda back down the mountain, my trunk full of empty trays and a $50,000 contract sitting in my purse, I knew my old life was dead and buried, and the resurrection was just getting started. That first lunch with Khalil bled into endless dinners. The dinners mutated into marathon midnight phone calls, and those phone calls evolved into something I never dreamed I would find at 66. A devastating, all-consuming love. Khalil was a widower, just like me. He had lost his wife to a brutal war with cancer 5 years ago, and just like me, he had spent years convinced his story ended the day she flatlined. But unlike me, he had an army of children who fiercely pushed him to rebuild, to hunt down new fire, to refuse to just exist as a ghost. When I lost Mira, he confessed during a quiet dinner at his estate. I swore I would never feel the sun on my face again. My children kept telling me she would be furious if I turned into a shadow, but I was completely deaf to it. We were sitting on his sprawling terrace, overlooking a private courtyard, drowning in roses and stone fountains. The table was set with heavy crystal, but the air between us was raw and intimate. "So, what finally cracked the ice?" I asked him. "Time." And the brutal realization that honoring her memory didn't mean burying myself alive. It meant burning as bright as I could, exactly the way she wanted me to. His words hit me like a freight train, echoing the exact guilt I had been dragging around for years. The guilt of wanting to be something more than a tragic, self-sacrificing widow. Meanwhile, my bakery had gone nuclear. The Sterling Gala was merely the spark. Every single weekend was booked solid, with high society contracts. And during the week, my little storefront was swarmed by a mob of locals, desperate to taste the magic that had brought billionaires to their knees. I pulled the trigger and hired a real Brigade Mia, a 25-year-old culinary school prodigy with fire in her eyes, and Eleanor, who officially tore up her retirement papers just to jump back into the trenches with me. We knocked down a wall, expanded the footprint, hauled in commercial iron, and launched a retail line that immediately got swallowed up by 3 ultra-premium grocers in the city. But the real earthquake wasn't the money. It was the shift inside my own blood. Rachel had tried to breach my defenses multiple times since the night of the gala. Her apologies were clumsy, highly calculated maneuvers that felt more like damage control than actual remorse. "Mom, I really think I misread the room back then," she told me during one of her uninvited drop-ins, her eyes tracking the relentless flood of paying customers at the register. "I just didn't realize how serious this whole thing was." "How serious what was, Rachel?" "Your business, your success." And there it was, the ugly truth. She wasn't sorry she had ripped my heart out. She was sorry she had bet against the winning horse. "Rachel," I said aggressively, tying off a pastry box for a waiting client, "I have been doing a lot of auditing regarding our relationship." She blinked. "Okay." "And I have decided we are drawing some hard lines in the sand." She frowned, crossing her arms. "What kind of lines?" "The kind of lines that prevent you from ever treating me like collateral damage again. The kind of lines that dictate you only get a seat at my table if you bring absolute respect." "Mom, I have always respected you." "No," I fired back, my voice cracking like a whip. "You absolutely have not. You branded me the failure of the family in the middle of a church. Your husband told half the town my life's work was horrible. You actively tried to burn my business to the ground with vicious rumors." Her face flushed violently red. "We were just worried about you." "You were embarrassed by me. There is a massive difference." She stood there, completely paralyzed by the truth. "What do you want from me?" she finally whispered. It was the first time in my entire life she had ever asked me what I needed. "I need you to realize that I am a grown woman who owns her own destiny. I need you to look at me as a titan, not a tragedy or a punchline. And if you cannot do that, I need you to lose my number." Rachel walked out of the bakery that day without firing a single shot. But a week later, she walked back in dragging Mark behind her. And this time, the arrogance had been completely stripped from their bones. "Mrs. Gallagher," Mark started, and the fact that he used my actual name instead of that condescending mother-in-law title hit me like a shockwave. "Rachel and I are here to formally apologize for our actions. We have absolutely zero defense." Mom Rachel choked out, and for the first time in decades, the tears shining in her eyes were actually real. "I have been a toxic daughter. I tore you down when I should have been your shield. I treated you like a joke when I should have been terrified of your potential." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was a foundation. 2 months later, Khalil asked me to marry him. It wasn't some flashy cinematic stunt. We were shoulder to shoulder in his massive kitchen, him playing sous chef while I stress tested a new recipe for a gala when he just stopped and looked at me. "Joanne, these last few months have been the greatest gift I have received in 5 years." I wiped the flour from my forehead, looking up from the puff pastry. "They have been my lifeline, too." "I am 59 years old," he continued, his voice dropping low. "I was dead certain the romantic chapter of my life had been permanently closed. But you tore the roof off my world. You proved to me that the clock never actually runs out. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I am obsessed with your grit, your genius, your absolute refusal to die quietly. I love how you catch fire when you talk about flavor profiles. I love that you run your kitchen like a family. I love how you took absolute agony and forged it into an empire. He stepped into my space and took my flour-covered hands. Will you marry me, Joanne Gallagher? The answer bypassed my brain and came straight from my soul. Yes. The wedding was an intimate, devastatingly elegant strike in his private gardens. 0 dead weight, just the absolute inner circle. Eleanor, Mia, Clara, a handful of my most fiercely loyal clients, and Khalil's children, who had chartered a flight straight from Dubai and welcomed me into the fold with a warmth that broke me down into tears. Rachel and Mark were sitting in the front row. Rachel wept through the entire ceremony, not out of pity, but from a profound, shattering sense of reverence. Afterward, she crushed me in a hug and whispered into my neck, "Mom, I am so deeply sorry. It took me this long to finally see the giant that you are." "It is never too late to wake up," I whispered back. Khalil and I ghosted to Paris for the honeymoon, tearing through the most legendary patisseries on the grid. He would introduce me to French masters as his wife, the most lethal pastry chef in America. And for the first time, I realized I hadn't just found a husband. I had found a partner who actually saw the lion inside me. When we landed back stateside, Khalil threw his massive operational weight behind Sweet Sunrise. Armed with his corporate infrastructure and global network, my bakery mutated into a juggernaut. We cut the ribbon on a second location, then a third. We launched a premium export line. But the wildest transformation wasn't the balance sheet. It was the woman looking back at me in the mirror. I was no longer the bruised mother begging for scraps of validation from her daughter. I was no longer the invisible widow buried alive in her dead husband's shadow. I was Joanne Gallagher Al-Mansouri, CEO, wife. A woman who at 67 years old proved to the world that life can ignite at any given second as long as you have the sheer violence of will to strike the match. A year after the wedding, Rachel drove up to the new estate I shared with Khalil. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, and I was deep in the kitchen experimenting with a ruthless baklava recipe I had extracted from my husband's bloodline. "Mom," she said, leaning against the marble island, watching me stretch the phyllo dough until it was paper thin. "I need to tell you something." I stopped rolling. "What is it?" "I am pregnant." I dropped the rolling pin and locked eyes with her, and for the first time in her life, she looked completely stripped of her armor. Raw, vulnerable, uncalculated. "And I want this kid to know their real grandmother," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Not the ghost I tried to turn you into. The titan you actually are. I want them to know their grandmother is a woman who stared down the barrel of a gun and refused to blink. A woman who caught lightning in a bottle twice. A woman who built an empire with her bare hands." Hot tears flooded my eyes. I want this baby to grow up knowing that the clock never runs out on being a badass, she cried. I want them to learn how to fight from you. I pulled her across the marble counter and held her, and for the first time in a decade, I finally had my daughter back. That night, as Khalil and I were turning down the lights, he pulled me close. "How does it feel knowing you are going back into the grandmother trenches?" "I feel like the universe just handed me a second chance to get it right," I whispered. "It was never your job to get it right the first time," he murmured, kissing my forehead. "It was their job to open their eyes and see the giant standing in the room. At 67, I finally decoded the ultimate truth. Self-love is not a crime. Hunting down your own glory is not vanity. The clock never actually runs out on becoming the monster you were always destined to be. And sometimes, when you finally find the guts to walk through the fire completely alone, you realize the universe was just burning away the dead weight, preparing you to walk alongside the absolute titans who actually deserve to stand in your shadow. My name is Joanne Gallagher El-Mansouri. I am 67 years old. I am the CEO of a multi-million-dollar empire. I am fiercely married to the love of my life, and I finally have the bloodline I always fought for. And every single piece of it started the second I decided my life was worth infinitely more than everyone else's comfort. Yeah,